The first sound was a crack, like the world splitting in two. 1 minute, Sarah Wilkins was thinking about the stifling Boston apartments they'd left behind. The next, she was airborne. The wagon lurched, a scream caught in her throat, and James's hand slipped right through hers. The sky and the dusty earth became a spinning nightmare of brown and blue. She was tumbling, rolling down a steep embankment, the Badlands tearing at her like a wild animal. Rocks ripped her dress, thorns clawed at her skin. Then, nothing. Just a sudden, violent stop at the bottom of a ravine, and a pain in her back so sharp it stole her breath. She tried to push herself up, her arms worked, her hands scrabbled at the dirt. But her legs were just there, like they belonged to someone else. Panic, cold and sharp, shot through her. She couldn't feel them. She couldn't feel anything below her waist. "James," she cried, but her voice was a choked whisper. "James, I can't move!" Above her the world was chaos. The horses were screaming, James was shouting, the broken wagon was teetering on the edge of the cliff. He finally wrestled the horses to a stop, his face a mask of terror as he peered down at her. "Sarah, don't move!" A laugh, brittle and broken, escaped her lips. "I couldn't if I wanted to," she gasped, the dust on her face turning to mud as tears began to stream from her eyes. He scrambled down the slope, sliding the last few feet, his hands hovering over her, afraid to touch. "My God, Sarah," he breathed, his voice trembling. "Where does it hurt?" She could only whisper the words that would change their lives forever. "My back, James. I can't feel my legs." The look on his face shifted from fear to a kind of desolate horror. They were in the middle of nowhere. Miles from any town, any doctor, any hope. Out here, an injury like this wasn't just an injury, it was a death sentence. James looked around wildly, at the endless, empty landscape, as if he could will a doctor to appear from behind a rock. "I'll get you back to the wagon," he said, his voice trying for a confidence he didn't feel. "We'll find help. The settlement can't be far." He lifted her, and she had to bite her lips so hard she tasted blood to keep from screaming. The pain in her spine was a white-hot fire, but the terrifying emptiness below it was so much worse. As he carried her up the rocky slope, his arms shaking from the strain, Sarah's eyes scanned the horizon. She had never felt so small, so utterly helpless. The dream of a new life, of open spaces, and a home of their own, had shattered in an instant. All that was left was the merciless sun, and a silence so deep, it felt like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for them to die. But what neither of them saw, what they couldn't possibly have known, was that they weren't alone. High on a distant ridge, a lone figure on a painted horse had watched the whole thing. A pair of dark eyes observed their struggle, silent, patient, and unreadable. The world had shrunk to the 4 rotting canvas walls of the wagon. That night, James did his best to make Sarah comfortable, but it was an impossible task. The wagon was broken, one of the horses was lame, and Sarah was fading. She drifted in and out of a feverish sleep, her skin burning to the touch. James knew they were out of time. "I have to go," he murmured, pressing a damp cloth to her forehead. "At first light. I'll ride to the settlement. I have to get a doctor." Her eyes fluttered open, slick with fever. "Don't leave me," she pleaded, her voice barely a thread of sound. "Please, James." He took her hand, his own shaking. "I have to, my love. It's our only chance." The night was an eternity of pained whispers and the howling of coyotes that sounded like they were laughing at their fate. When dawn finally broke, painting the sky in cruel, beautiful shades of orange and gold, James made his preparations. He filled a canteen, checked the good horse, Duke, and leaned over to kiss his wife's dry, cracked lips. "I'll be back before nightfall," he promised. A lie. They both knew it was a lie. He mounted the horse and rode toward the ridge he prayed would lead to salvation. He didn't look back, because if he looked back, he knew he'd never be able to leave. Sarah watched him disappear, a tiny speck against the vast, unforgiving landscape. And then she was alone. Utterly, completely alone. The silence pressed in on her, heavy and suffocating. She closed her eyes and prayed, not for a miracle, but just for a quick end. James pushed Duke harder than he ever had before. The sun climbed, baking the earth until the air shimmered with heat. Every single minute he was away from Sarah felt like a betrayal, a knife twisting in his gut. But what choice did he have? He had to find help. He had to. When he finally crested that ridge around noon, the hope that had been fueling him died in his chest. This wasn't a settlement. It was a joke. A few ramshackle cabins, a sad little corral, and a building with a crooked sign that read, Walker's Trading Post. This was not the promised land from the brochures. This was the end of the line. His legs felt like lead as he dismounted and stumbled inside. The place was even more depressing on the inside. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light cutting through the grimy windows. Behind a counter stood a gray-haired man with eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and cared about none of it. "Help you?" the man grunted, not even looking up. "My wife," James gasped, his voice raw with desperation. "We had an accident. Our wagon crashed. She's hurt. Badly. She can't move her legs. I need a doctor." The man, Walker, finally lifted his head, his expression as blank as a stone. "Ain't no doctor here," he said flatly. "Nearest one's in Bismarck. 4-day ride from here." The floor seemed to drop out from under James. 4 days, but there has to be someone. Anyone. She might be dying. Walker just shook his head, a slow, final motion. "Folks around here tend to their own. Got enough trouble without taking on a stranger's." He paused, then delivered the final, brutal blow. "A woman can't walk out here. She's as good as dead anyway." Rage, hot and blinding, surged through James. He slammed his fist down on the rough-hewn counter, making a stack of tin plates jump. "She is my wife. I will not just let her die." The noise drew the attention of 2 other men who had been slumped over a table in the corner. They ambled over, their faces hard and weathered. "What's the trouble?" the older one asked, his hand resting near a pistol on his belt. James turned to them, his face pleading. "My wife is paralyzed. I just need help. I need to get her to a doctor." The 2 men exchanged a look. It wasn't a look of sympathy. It was a look of calculation. The younger one spoke. "Mister, we're all just trying to survive. Can't spare men or horses for a rescue." "I'll pay," James said, the word catching in his throat. "I have money." "Ain't about money," the older man grunted. "It's about winter. It's comin'. Every day we lose helpin' you is a day we ain't preparin'. It's you or us. And it ain't gonna be us." James looked from one cold face to the next, seeing nothing but a wall of indifference. This couldn't be happening. These were his people. "Please," he whispered. "She's all I have." Walker let out a heavy sigh, a sound of pure annoyance. "Look, son. The best thing you can do for her is make her comfortable." He hesitated, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Or end her suffering. Quick-like. A paralyzed woman ain't gonna last a week out here. You'd be doing her a kindness." The words hit James like a punch to the gut. He stumbled backward, his mind reeling. You're telling me to kill my own wife?" He stared at them, these supposed pillars of civilization. "What kind of monsters are you?" The younger man just shrugged, a cruel smirk on his face. "Practical ones. Out here, sentiment gets you dead." James backed away, toward the door, disgust and despair choking him. "I'll find help somewhere else." Walker let out a harsh laugh. "There is no somewhere else, boy. Not for 50 miles. Outside, James leaned against the wall, the world spinning. He'd promised Sarah. He'd promised he'd come back with help. Now he had to go back with a death sentence. As he reached for his horse's reins, a woman's voice, soft and hesitant, spoke from behind him. "I heard what happened." He turned to see a woman in her 40s, her face etched with the lines of hardship and grief. "I'm Martha Evans," she said. "I can't do much, but I can give you some willow bark tea, for her pain, and some clean bandages." A flicker of gratitude cut through James's despair. "Thank you," he managed to say. "Anything." She hurried into a nearby cabin and returned with a small, cloth-wrapped package. "This won't heal her," she said, her eyes sad. "But it might give her some peace." "Why are you helping me?" James asked, his voice thick. "No one else would." Martha looked away, toward the distant, hazy ridges. "Lost my little girl 2 winters back. Fever. No one could help her either." She looked back at him, a strange light in her eyes. "There's talk," she said, her voice dropping low, "of a Comanche healer. They say he camps near a place called Spirit Rock. Half a day's ride, southeast." James stared at her. "A Comanche? Most folks stay clear," she continued. "Don't trust him. But I've heard stories. That he knows things our doctors don't. That he's healed men given up for dead." She gave a little shrug. "Probably just stories, but—" "If you've got nothing left to lose?" A wild, desperate hope ignited in James's chest. "Spirit Rock? Can you tell me how to find it?" She quickly gave him the directions, her eyes darting around to make sure no one was listening. "Don't you tell anyone I sent you," she whispered urgently. "And don't get your hopes up. Even if he is real, the Comanche have no reason to love folks like us." James didn't care. It was a chance. A tiny, insane, impossible chance. But it was more than he'd had a minute ago. He swung himself onto Duke's back. "Thank you, Mrs. Evans," he said, his voice ringing with a newfound determination. "I won't forget this." As he spurred his horse away from the miserable outpost, away from the men who had told him to murder his own wife, he clung to the sliver of hope. A Comanche healer. It was crazy. But in a world that had gone completely mad, crazy was all he had left. The sun began to dip below the horizon, and back at the broken wagon, Sarah was starting to give up. The water was gone. James was gone. The pain was a living thing, chewing on her spine. Fear, dark and cold, was settling into her bones. Was this it? Was she going to die here, alone, in the dirt? A coyote howled, a lonely, mournful sound that echoed the emptiness in her soul. And then she heard it. A soft sound. The crunch of a footstep on gravel. "James?" she called out, her voice a dry rasp. Hope flared in her chest, bright and painful. But the silhouette that appeared at the edge of the wagon wasn't her husband. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with long, braided hair. A Native American, and he was staring right at her. Terror, absolute and primal, seized her. Every horror story she'd ever heard, every whispered warning about savages in the wilderness, came rushing back. She was paralyzed, defenseless, a perfect victim. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the knife, the arrow, the end. But it didn't come. She opened her eyes. The man was closer now, his face unreadable in the twilight. He moved with a quiet grace that was more terrifying than any war cry. He held something out to her, a water skin. He gestured for her to drink. Her thirst was so powerful it overrode her fear. Her hands trembled as she took the skin. The water was cool and clean, the most wonderful thing she'd ever tasted. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "My husband. He went for help." The man didn't speak. He just watched her with those dark, intense eyes. After a long moment he knelt beside her and gently, so gently, placed a hand on her leg. He pressed down. Then again, higher up. He was testing her. When she didn't flinch, didn't react at all, his expression grew impossibly grim. He looked her right in the eye. "Can't feel," he said, his English accented but clear. He touched her legs again. "No," Sarah whispered, the tears finally breaking free. "I can't." The man stood up, his gaze sweeping across the dark horizon, as if he was weighing the fate of the world. Then he looked back down at her. He spoke a single cryptic word. "Wait." And with that, he melted back into the shadows, as silent as he had arrived. Sarah was left alone again, clutching the water skin, her mind reeling. Had she dreamed it? But the water skin was real. And blooming in her heart, right alongside the terror and the pain, was a strange and unfamiliar feeling. It felt a little bit like hope. James rode through the night like a man possessed. Moonlight turned the Badlands into a strange, alien landscape of silver and black. Martha Evans's directions were his only guide. Spirit Rock. A formation that looked like a man's face in profile. It was all he had. The guilt of leaving Sarah was a physical weight on his shoulders. What if that stranger had found her? What if the coyotes? He pushed the thoughts away. He couldn't afford to think like that. If he did, he'd go mad. Just as his hope began to fray, he saw it. A massive rock formation silhouetted against the starry sky. It looked exactly like a face. He was in the right place. Now he just had to find the camp. He searched for what felt like hours, his desperation growing with every passing minute. Finally, he saw it. A faint, flickering glow, tucked away in a sheltered ravine. A campfire. He dismounted, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He knew this was dangerous. He was a white man, alone, walking into a Comanche camp in the middle of the night. He had every reason to be shot on sight. As he crept closer, a voice barked out in a language he didn't understand. He froze, his hands shooting up into the air. "I need help," he called out, his voice shaking. "My wife is hurt. I was told there's a healer here." A figure stepped out of the shadows, a rifle leveled directly at James's chest. It was a young warrior, his face a mask of suspicion and hate. "White man brings trouble," the warrior snarled in broken English. "Go away." "Please," James begged, taking a half step forward. The rifle barrel didn't waver. "My wife, she can't move her legs. She's going to die." "Not our problem," the young man spat. "White people take our land, kill our buffalo. Now you want help?" Before James could answer, another voice spoke from the darkness behind the warrior. It was an older voice, calm and full of authority. The two spoke rapidly in Comanche. The young warrior argued, gesturing angrily at James, but eventually he lowered his rifle, though his eyes still burned with hatred. A man stepped into the firelight. He was tall and dignified, with gray streaks in his long black hair. His face was a roadmap of wisdom and sorrow. "I am Tawakoni Jim," he said. His English was perfect, startlingly so. "They call me a healer. Why should I help your wife?" The question was a sharp, clean blade. James had expected to plead, to bargain. He hadn't expected to be challenged. Because she's suffering," he stammered. "She's innocent." Tawakoni Jim's expression didn't change. "Many innocent people suffer. My people suffer. Why is your wife's suffering more important than theirs?" James was speechless. The man was right. How could he answer that? He searched for the truth. "It's not," he said, his voice quiet. "It's not more important. It's just, she's my wife. I love her. I would do anything to save her." "Anything?" The healer's eyebrow arched slightly. "Would you give your life for hers?" "Yes," James said, without a moment's hesitation. "Would you give up your land? Your home? Everything you own?" "All of it," James said, meeting the healer's gaze. Tawakoni Jim studied him for a long, silent moment, his eyes searching for the slightest hint of a lie. "White men make many promises," he said finally. "They are written on the wind." "I'm not a white man making a promise," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm a husband, begging for his wife's life." The silence stretched on. The fire crackled. The young warrior watched, his hand on his knife. James felt his hope dwindling. Then Tawakoni Jim spoke. "I will come and see your wife," he said. "I promise nothing more." Relief washed over James so powerfully his knees almost buckled. "Thank you," he breathed. "Thank you." The healer turned and spoke to the young warrior, Nakota. It was clearly an order. Nakota argued, his face contorted with rage, before storming off into the darkness. "Nakota disagrees with helping whites," Tawakoni Jim explained calmly. "His father was killed by soldiers last year." "I'm sorry," James said, and he meant it. "Words mean little," the healer replied. turning to gather supplies into a leather bag. Actions show a man's heart. Where is your wife? James described the location of the wagon. Tawakoni Jim nodded. I know the place. We will leave at dawn. But my wife needs help now. Traveling the Badlands at night is foolish, the healer said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Your wife needs you to be strong, not dead. Rest. James knew he was right. He accepted a piece of dried meat and a spot by the fire, but he didn't sleep. His mind was a whirlwind of hope and terror. He had found help. But would it be enough? And would it be in time? At the first hint of light, they set out. Tawakoni Jim, James, and a reluctant Nakota, who had returned in the night, his face still a thundercloud of resentment. He was clearly there only to protect the old healer from the white man. As they rode, James tried to fill the tense silence. How did you learn to speak English so well? I attended a missionary school for 7 years, Tawakoni Jim said without looking at him. They tried to wash the Comanche out of me. They failed. Did you learn their medicine? I learned some of their ways, the healer said. But my healing comes from the earth, from my people. The plants and the spirits speak, if you know how to listen. Can you heal paralysis? James asked, the question he was most afraid to ask. Tawakoni Jim was silent for a long time. Sometimes, he said carefully, the body is a river that has been dammed. If you can clear the blockage, the river will flow again. Sometimes the dam is too strong. They rode on, pushing the horses hard. By mid-morning, James started to recognize the terrain. They were getting close. His heart began to pound with a mixture of hope and dread. What would he find? As they came over the final ridge, Nakota suddenly threw up a hand, stopping them. Someone is there, he whispered, pointing toward the wagon. James squinted. A figure was moving around their wagon. A man. Before he could think, James spurred Duke forward, racing down the slope in a panic. Wait! Tawakoni Jim called, but James wasn't listening. Who was it? One of those men from the trading post? Had they come to rob them? To finish the job Walker had suggested? As he got closer, his mind reeled with confusion. The figure looked familiar. He was dressed like Tawakoni Jim. He was Comanche. James yanked his horse to a stop, staring. The man by the wagon straightened up and turned. He looked like Tawakoni Jim, but younger, with a long scar down his left cheek. Who are you? James demanded, his hand dropping to the knife on his belt. What are you doing here? The man's face was calm. I am Echapita. My brother is Tawakoni Jim. Before James could process this, Sarah's voice, weak but clear, drifted from the wagon. James, it's okay. He's been helping me. At that moment, Tawakoni Jim and Nakota rode up behind him. The two brothers locked eyes. A torrent of rapid-fire Comanche flowed between them, their expressions shifting from surprise to anger, to something James couldn't read. He jumped off his horse and rushed to Sarah's side. She was pale, but her eyes were lucid. The fever seemed to have broken. Are you okay? He asked, grabbing her hand. He didn't hurt you? No, she said, shaking her head. He gave me water, and a tea. For the pain. It worked. She looked past him at the two brothers, still arguing. Who's the older one? That's him, James said, his head spinning. That's Tawakoni Jim, the healer I went to find. Finally, the argument outside stopped. Tawakoni Jim approached the wagon, his face grave. He looked at James, but his words were for both of them. My brother says your wife's spine is damaged, he said. The paralysis, it may be permanent. The hope that had carried James this far crumbled into dust. Permanent, but you can help, can't you? There has to be something. There are treatments, Tawakoni Jim said slowly. Poultices, herbs. They might help reduce the swelling, but it will take time. Weeks, maybe longer. Weeks? James whispered. She cannot be moved far, the healer continued. And my brother and I, we disagree on this. Echapita, the younger brother, stepped forward. The woman is innocent, he said, his English rough. She will die if we do not help. All whites share the guilt for what has been done to our people, Nakota interjected, his voice dripping with venom. Enough! Tawakoni Jim's voice cut through the tension. He turned back to James. We have a camp, 2 hours' ride from here. There is fresh water. It is a better place for healing. If you want our help, we will take her there. Yes, James said instantly. Anything. Please. There is a price, Achapata said. Not money, a promise. What promise? If we help your wife, Tawakoni Jim said, his eyes boring into James's soul, you will tell the truth about us. You will tell your people that we are not savages. You will tell them that when your own kind left you to die, we were the ones who showed you mercy. I swear it, James said, his voice thick with emotion. The brothers exchanged a long look. An unspoken agreement passed between them. Tawakoni Jim gave a single, sharp nod. We will help. As they began to construct a travois to carry Sarah, James saw Nakota standing off to the side, his arms crossed, his face a mask of fury. James walked over to him. Thank you, he said. Nakota glared at him. I do not do this for you, he hissed. I do this for Tawakoni Jim. He is a great man. You are nothing. He leaned in closer, his voice low and dangerous. White man's medicine is whiskey that killed my mother and bullets that killed my father. Why should I believe your promises mean anything? The raw pain in the young man's words hit James harder than any fist. I can't change what my people have done, James said quietly. I can only answer for what I do. Nakota stared at him for a long moment. We will see, he said. We will see what kind of man you are. As they gently loaded Sarah onto the travois, she squeezed his hand. Do you trust them, James? She whispered. He looked at the 3 Comanche men working together, their movements efficient and careful. He looked at Tawakoni Jim, whose eyes held a deep and ancient sadness. He looked at Achapata, whose compassion had saved his wife's life. He even looked at Nakota, whose hatred was born of a pain he couldn't even imagine. Yes, James said, and he was surprised to find that he meant it with all his heart. I do. The Comanche camp was a hidden paradise. Tucked into a valley, a clear spring bubbled up into a pool surrounded by teepees. It was a world away from the harsh, sun-baked hellscape they had just left. As they entered the camp, a hush fell over the people there. Women stopped their work, children stared, their dark eyes wide with curiosity and suspicion. An old woman, her face a beautiful map of wrinkles, came forward. She spoke to Tawakoni Jim, her voice sharp but not unkind, gesturing toward Sarah. This is our mother, Quenai, Tawakoni Jim translated. She says your wife must be brought to her teepee. It is the best place for healing. Inside, the teepee was clean and cool. Sarah was gently transferred to a bed of soft furs. Quenai began her examination, her gnarled hands surprisingly gentle as they probed Sarah's back. She spoke to her son in low tones. My mother says the bone is broken, Tawakoni Jim said, his voice grim. The swelling is pressing on the spirit path to her legs. We must reduce the swelling. If we can, feeling may return. And if you can't? James asked, his voice barely a whisper. Tawakoni Jim met his gaze. There was no pity in his eyes, only truth. Then she will never walk again. But she will live. The days that followed were like a waking dream. James watched as Tawakoni Jim and his mother worked their magic. They applied poultices made of herbs he'd never seen, brewed teas that eased Sarah's pain, and massaged her lifeless legs for hours every day. We must keep the muscles alive, Tawakoni Jim explained, so that if the spirit path reopens, they will be ready. Sarah, freed from the constant agony, began to heal in spirit, if not yet in body. She learned a few words of Comanche, bringing a smile to old Quenai's face. James was put to work. He wasn't a guest. He was expected to earn his wife's keep. He repaired teepees, hunted small game, and learned that his entire life he'd been wrong about these people. He had called them savages. He had been the savage. Nakota watched his every move, his suspicion a constant, unnerving presence. One night, as James fumbled to start a fire, Nakota appeared out of the darkness. "You do it wrong," he said, his voice flat. He knelt and, with a few deft movements, produced a flame. "You work hard," Nakota grunted, a flicker of something like respect in his eyes. "Not lazy, like most whites." It was the closest thing to a compliment James had ever received from him. Then, weeks after they had arrived, the miracle they had been praying for happened. It started as a faint tingle in Sarah's toes. At first, they thought she was imagining it. But then, it happened again. A few days later, she was lying on her bed of furs, concentrating with all her might when she did it. She wiggled the big toe on her left foot. It was the tiniest of movements, but it was like the sun had just risen in the teepee. Tawakoni Jim allowed a rare smile to touch his lips. "The dam is breaking," he said. "The river begins to flow." The news sent a ripple of excitement through the camp. Quinai redoubled her efforts. The progress was agonizingly slow, measured in millimeters, but it was real. One day, a month after their arrival, Sarah managed to bend her left knee. Tears streamed down her face as James hugged her, careful of her back. "I never thought I'd be so happy to move my leg an inch," she sobbed. That night, James sat with Tawakoni Jim by the fire. "I don't know how I can ever repay you," he said. "Remember your promise," the healer said. "Tell the truth about us." "I will," James vowed. "But that's not enough." Tawakoni Jim looked into the flames. "There is something else," he said slowly. "Your wife has the spirit of a healer. My mother sees it. She learns our ways quickly. If you were to stay the winter, she could learn more. She could be a bridge between our worlds." James was stunned. "You would teach her your ways? After everything my people have done?" "Knowledge is not like land," Tawakoni Jim said. "You can share it without losing it. Perhaps, if our worlds share something, there will be less hate." But their fragile peace was about to be shattered. The next morning, as James was helping a Chapita skin a deer, a warning cry went up from the edge of the camp. Riders were approaching. White men. James's blood ran cold. He knew who it was before he even saw them. It was Walker, from the trading post, and the two hard-faced men from that day. They had guns. And they looked angry. They rode straight into the camp as if they owned it, their horses scattering children and dogs. Walker's cold eyes found James. "Well, well," he sneered. "Look what the savages dragged in." "What do you want, Walker?" James asked, stepping in front of Sarah's teepee. Tawakoni Jim and a Chapita moved to stand with him. Nakota appeared as if from nowhere, a bow in his hand, an arrow already nocked. "We heard you was out here," Walker said, his eyes scanning the camp. "Heard you was looking for something. Gold, maybe. Found some Comanche gold, did ya? We want our share." "There's no gold," James said. "You're mistaken." "I don't think so," Walker said, dismounting. "That woman, Martha Evans, she got to talking. Said you were headed out this way looking for a legend. We're gonna find it, even if we have to tear this whole camp apart to do it." He took a step forward. Nakota drew his bowstring back. "I'd stop right there if I were you," James said, his voice steady. Walker just laughed. "You in what army?" he asked, raising his pistol. He pointed it not at James, but at the entrance to Sarah's teepee. "Get out of my way." What happened next was a blur. Nakota loosed his arrow and it flew with a deadly hiss, sinking into the shoulder of one of Walker's men. The man screamed and fell from his horse. Walker roared with rage and fired his pistol. But he wasn't aiming at Nakota. He was aiming at James. Time seemed to slow down. James saw the flash, heard the roar, but before the bullet could find him, a body slammed into his, knocking him to the ground. It was Nakota. He had thrown himself in front of James. The second of Walker's men raised his rifle, but a Chapita was faster, his own knife finding its home in the man's side. Walker, seeing he was suddenly alone and outmatched, panicked. He turned to run, but Tawakoni Jim stood in his path, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't need one. The sheer force of his presence was enough. Walker stumbled backward, tripped, and fell. The fight was over as quickly as it had begun. James scrambled to his feet, his heart hammering. He knelt beside Nakota. The young warrior was clutching his side, blood seeping between his fingers. The bullet meant for James had hit him instead. "Why?" James asked, his voice choked with disbelief. "Why did you do that?" Nakota looked up at him, his face pale with pain. A small, wry smile touched his lips. "Actions," he gasped. "Actions show a man's heart." Tawakoni Jim and Quinai were already at his side, working to stop the bleeding. The 2 wounded men from the trading post were rounded up. Their fate would be decided by the council. But in that moment, James knew everything had changed. The hatred was gone. The bridge had been built, not with words or promises, but with blood. Later that week, as Nakota was beginning to recover, James sat with Tawakoni Jim. The settlers had been sent away, their horses taken, with a warning never to return. "He saved my life," James said, still struggling to understand. "The boy who hated me more than anyone." "He did not save your life because he stopped hating you," Tawakoni Jim said. "He saved your life because he loves his people. He saw you standing to defend our home. He saw your heart, and he knew you were worth saving." The healer looked off toward Spirit Rock, visible in the distance. "There is something I have not told you," he said. "Years ago, I had a daughter. She fell from a horse. Her back was broken, just like your wife's." James stared at him, his heart aching. "A white doctor came through our lands. I begged him for help. He looked at my daughter, lying in her bed, and he said there was nothing to be done. He said her kind were not worth the trouble. She died before the winter snows melted." He turned his ancient, sorrowful eyes to James. "When you came to my camp, begging for your wife's life, I saw that doctor's face. But I saw your face too. I saw a husband who loved his wife. And I decided, in that moment, that I would not be the man that doctor was. I would not let another man suffer as I have suffered. Helping your wife. It was how I finally began to heal myself." A few months later, as the first snows of winter began to fall, Sarah took her first steps. Leaning heavily on crutches that a Chapata had carved for her, she walked from her teepee to the central fire. The entire camp watched in silence, and then broke into a cheer. She had done it. They had done it. James and Sarah never left. They had set out in a wagon to find a piece of land, a place to call home. And in the most unexpected way, they had found it. Sarah became a healer, her knowledge a blend of the white world she had left and the Comanche world that had saved her. James became a hunter, a provider, and a storyteller, fulfilling his promise to Tawakoni Jim every day. They had found that home is not a plot of land you own, but a community that you love, and a life that has purpose. They found that sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to find everything you truly need. If you were moved by Sarah and James's story, and believe in the power of kindness to bridge any divide, then do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what part of this story touched you the most. Thanks for watching.